Gentle music. Narrator, for millennia, the grand pyramids of Egypt have towered over the desert sands. Everything about the great ancient civilization that once seized the lands remained a mystery. That is until July 19, 1799. Dramatic music. A French soldier discovers a large stone about 35 miles east of Alexandria during Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian expedition, unearthing a written language that had been dead for thousands of years. The translations would prove to be the key to unlocking the secrets of an entire civilization. Dramatic music. Egypt is the gift of the Nile. That's what Herodotus, the father of history, said. Since the Nile is the lifeline, as it provided Egypt with water for the cultivation of crops, which led to the burgeoning of civilization all along the length of the Nile Valley. The river strip that divided the Egyptian territory into two parts provided a favorable environment for the rise of civilization when the Nile Valley began in the Miocene times, cutting it into its current shape. The various geographical resources effectively contributed to the state's foundation. As a result of the annual floods that spread the fertile soil to the east and west over the centuries, mud deposits built up. When the water recedes and flows along its banks, the agricultural year begins, making Egypt one of the first agricultural communities that ever existed in human history. At the end of the Paleolithic era, there was a widespread production of arrows, harpoons, querns, sewed skins, bone works, and pottery. Carbon-14 tests, on the other hand, were used by researchers to demonstrate that corn was harvested in a Neolithic silo on the edge of Thiam between 4600 and 4250 BC. Later, people built shacks and huts out of reeds and solid mud, and sowed corn on the muddy soil of the Nile marshes. Ancient Egypt was divided into two territories, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt lay to the north, where the Nile extended out with its several branches to form the Nile Delta. Upper Egypt, which stretched to Aswan, was to the south. The two kingdoms were united around 3000 BC by King Narmer, but each retained its regalia, the hedjet or white crown for Upper Egypt, and the dishret or red crown for Lower Egypt. As a result, the pharaohs were known as the rulers of the two lands, and they wore the skint, a double crown with each half denoting sovereignty of a different land. Vocalists gently singing. The pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt is the period preceding documented history, encompassing around 6000 to 3150 BCE, from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic age, and on to the founding of the First Dynasty. While there are no written records from this period, archaeological digs in Egypt have unearthed items that convey their tale of the Nile River Valley's cultural history. The pre-dynastic period is called by the regions or ancient city sites where these artifacts were discovered, rather than the cultures that lived there.
Din is the first monarch to be represented wearing the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, showing that he ruled over a unified nation. Din was succeeded by two additional monarchs, Anajib and later Semerkhet, both of whom had tough reigns marked by insurgency. The dynasty ended with the Qas reign, during which his heirs struggled for the throne and were defeated by Hotep II, who established the Second Dynasty. Internal strife and a lack of or misunderstanding over records ruined the Second Dynasty, 2890 to 2670 BCE. None of the Second Dynasty monarchs have reliable dates, and several of the kings' names appear to be repeats of earlier rulers. Hotep II, which means two powerful ones at peace, is a prime illustration of this issue. Because of his name, it would seem that he came to power after subduing the princes who fought for the throne after Qa, but his name is inscribed on the entrance to Qa's tomb, implying that he was the ruler responsible for burying Qa, and he already had that name before the succession war broke out. Hotep II is credited with bringing peace to Egypt upon his ascension to the throne, although a brief one. Instability and rebellion marked his reign. Renab, also known as Nebra, was the first to link his name to that of the gods, and so create a bond between the monarch and the divine. There is no reasonable explanation for Peribsen's decision. Early academics claimed he was the first monotheist who declared Seth to be the sole deity. But evidence of his reign's devotion to various gods disprove this, because his name is only found in Upper Egypt. It's possible that he opted to ally with Seth for political reasons, to distinguish himself from the Horus religion of Lower Egypt. The inhabitants of the Badarian culture lived in movable tents, like their ancient forefathers, but preferred fixed homes. Following the Badarian period came the Amratian period, also known as Naqada, which constructed more complex homes with windows and hearths, wattle and daub walls, and windbreaks around the main entryway. The practice of mummification began around 3500 BC, where burial items were still left with the deceased. These developments were aided by the Gurzian culture, also known as Naqada II, 3500 to 3200 BC, which launched trading with other regions, inspiring changes in culture and art. The houses were built of sun-baked brick, and the more opulent ones included courtyards, an addition that would become commonplace in Egyptian homes later. The city of Abydos, located north of Naqada, became an important burial location, and huge tombs were built forming a necropolis, a city of the dead. These tombs were originally made of mud bricks, but subsequently of huge, neatly hewn limestone. Eventually, this site would become the burial place for Egypt's rulers. Despite this, evidence reveals that individuals from all across the nation had their deceased buried at Abydos, and gave burial gifts to commemorate their memory. By this time, the cities of Zois and Hierakonpolis were considered ancient, while Thinis, Naqada, and Nekhen were rapidly developing the hieroglyphic alphabet, which was invented around 3400 to 3200 BCE, was used for maintaining records. Although no entire sentences from this period have been discovered. At this time, the earliest Egyptian writing discovered so far originates from Abydos, and was discovered on pottery, clay seal imprints, and bone and ivory items. Complete sentences are not found in Egypt until the time of King Peribsen in the Second Dynasty 500 years later. This period led to the Naqada III period, from 3200 to 3150 BC. Following Naqada III, the early dynastic period and Egypt's recorded history began. With commerce, communities expanded and flourished, and the populations of both Lower and Upper Egypt increased. Small villages of brick dwellings and buildings evolved into bigger urban centers that soon clashed, most likely for trade products and water resources. Thinis, Naqada, and Nekhen were the three principal city-states of Upper Egypt during the period. Thinis appears to have defeated Naqada before absorbing Nekhen. These battles were fought between the Scorpion kings, whose identity is unknown, and others, most likely Ka and Narmer. According to some researchers, Scorpion I, Scorpion II, and Ka were the final three rulers of the proto-dynastic period, before King Narmer invaded and unified Lower and Upper Egypt and created the First Dynasty. Dramatic music, dramatic upbeat music. The early dynastic period in Egypt began in the years 3150 to 2613 BCE. This marks the beginning of the country's historical era, in which Upper Egypt, the south, and Lower Egypt to the north were unified as one country under centralized authority. During this time, the divine rule of the monarch started, and a distinct Egyptian culture emerged, including the development of writing, arts, and sciences. Menes, the first king of Egypt, was a ruler of Upper Egypt, presumably from Thinis or Hierakonpolis, who defeated the other city-states around him, before conquering Lower Egypt around 3150 BCE. Narmer married the princess Nethotep of Naqada in an arrangement to enhance the links between the two towns. He undertook military operations in Lower Egypt to quell revolts, and expand his territory into Canaan and Nubia. He sponsored massive construction projects, and urbanization developed throughout his reign. Horoha, Narmer's son, is assumed to have succeeded him in 3100 BCE, continuing his father's military expansion and increasing trade. He was notably interested in religion and the concept of the afterlife, and it was under his reign that the mastaba tomb was built. Horoha was replaced by his son Jur in 3050 BCE, who followed in his father's footsteps. His son Jet, about 3000 BCE, married Princess Mernith, and is considered to have taken leadership of the nation after his death. It is uncertain whether she governed as regent for her infant son Din or as queen, but her reign is notable for being the first time a woman is recorded governing in ancient Egypt. Din, about 2990 BCE, is regarded as the greatest monarch of the first dynasty and reigned for 50 years. His reputation as an efficient monarch stemmed from his economic advances, military conquests, and the stability of his rule, as proven by expensive construction projects and elaborate works of art.